17. October 1962. Rasthof-Greffenhausen, Autobahn A5, near Darmstadt. A man at a Formica table writes on the back of a freight manifest, with a pencil bitten down to a stub. I once drove soldiers to the front. Now I drive refrigerators to supermarkets. The road remembers every convoy. Karl does not say it aloud. He writes it as a sentence that will not be sent. He knows it could not be spoken openly when it mattered most. Not in 1945. Not in 1949. Not when the contracts depended on forgetting. The line is his arithmetic of a life that moved from gasoline and canvas to invoices and silence, from Wehrmacht grey to company livery blue. He is 42. He owns 26 lorries. He knows every service area between Kassel and Karlsruhe. He knows which asphalt seams were poured before the war and which after. The road does not forget. He writes this because he cannot not write it. He writes this because he cannot not write it. The road has a beginning for him. It starts in Fulda, 8 May 1945, evening. The sirens have fallen quiet. The church bells ring with no order. Somewhere a goat bleats behind a collapsed fence. In the street, a ploughshare sticks out of a broken shop window. There is no law. There is an order pinned to a tree by the American provost, curfew at 2100. Surrender weapons. Karl is a driver with no vehicle and no uniform. He burned the tunic, he kept the shoes. Allied Military Government Report, Detachment E2A, Fulda, 9 May 1945. Population docile, food stocks unknown, bridges intact but damaged. His mother keeps sugar in a jam jar with a blue lid. His father is missing since January east of the Vistula. A postcard from his brother says, "Assigned to Westwall, do not write." The arithmetic of loss begins with the missing. Numbers that are people. People who are just numbers in someone else's ledger. Rubble is not a metaphor. It is cubic meters. It is measured and listed. The mathematics of rubble in Frankfurt, 31 million cubic meters. In Kassel, 7.5. In Darmstadt, 6. Allied occupation reports use the language of engineers. 43% of housing stock destroyed or severely damaged. The city is a quarry of its own ruins. Some days there is a truck with a red cross. Most days there is none. The women climbed into this landscape with gloves and scarves, and the shovel blisters made their hands look like boiled fruit. They were called Trümmerfrauen. They were not saints. They were hungry. Diary, Henny M. Frankfurt, 12 May 1945. We formed a chain. Bricks, bricks, bricks. A boy with a handcart fell. His nose bled. Someone laughed and then cried. We took out the usable bricks, put them in piles. I told the boy, "You are carrying our future." Oral history, Hessisches Hauptstaats, Archive 1981. I thought if I move enough bricks, someone will return. They did not know if it would be husbands or sons or a different government. The mathematics of rubble is not linear. The more you carry, the more you see what cannot be repaired. Occupation forces entered by columns. They painted white stars onto signs. They requisitioned rooms with authorization letters. An American captain named Harlan wrote, "No fraternization, no flags, no singing, curfew at 9. Breadline at 8. At the edge of town, in a requisitioned brewery, a U.S. civil affairs officer pinned a map and marked it with pins. The map was of roads. Military lines became supply lines. Tanks were replaced by trucks painted olive drab carrying flour, powdered eggs, and paper sacks stamped USA. The Allied intelligence summaries from that May are laconic. General sanitation poor. Morale low but improving. It is the voice of a thermodynamics of collapse. Heat disperses. Systems find a new equilibrium. The hunger came in waves. Spring 1945 was hungry. Winter 1946-47 was a hunger that crept into the bones like fog into foundation stones. Government ration cards promised 500 calories. The Weather and Policy delivered less. Office of Military Government, U.S. AU-M Gus report, April 1947. Actual caloric intake in urban centers often below 1,000 guess. Intake in urban centers often below 1,000. Main complaints: potatoes with rot, lack of protein. Photographs from British Control Commission files show men in coats inside, hands wrapped in cloth, boiling beets in tin pots. The rations were a math problem. Add 2 cutlets of margarine, subtract 1 portion of brown bread, multiply by fear. The arithmetic of shortages was the master of every household. It ranked every neighbor by utility. It taught courtyards to be marketplaces. It taught children to read the angle of a policeman's cap. Cigarettes became money. It was a currency backed by scarcity and desire. A pack of Lucky Strike could buy a bushel of apples. 2 packs could fix a bicycle. 20 could move a wall. Carl had a uniform advantage. Years behind a wheel on unimproved roads. He made Hamsterfahrten into art, trips into rural Hesse, with bottles that looked like schnapps but smelled like gasoline, jars of jam and candles, and he returned with sacks of potatoes hidden under sacks of manure. "Driver, do you have papers?" the gendarme would ask. "Driver, do you have conscience?" a pastor would think. Allied Field Police File, Bad Hersfeld, 6 September 1946, stopped Opel truck on Landstrasse 27. Driver identified as Carl W., DOB, 1920, folder. Found 60 kg potatoes without transport permit. Confiscated 10 kg. Driver released with warning due to good behavior. There is a line in a letter he never sent to his mother: "The asphalt knows every trick I think I invent." Trummer women worked with bricks. Men like Carl worked with wheels. Bricks built walls. Wheels built routes. There were routes to farms, routes to black markets on Leipzigstrasse, routes to DPs in camps beyond the edge of rationed life. The British introduced care and maintenance measures. Americans shipped care packages. ERP would come later. For now, it was boxes opened in kitchens with tears, bundles of nylon stockings like a rumor from a future where things were soft and abundant. The mathematics of relief is arithmetic on a ledger. How many tons of flour equals 1 less closed school? How many pairs of shoes equals 1 less frostbitten foot? The answer is never an integer. Denazification arrived like a standardized test with no correct answers. Questionnaires with 131 items. Where did you work? Did you attend a Nazi meeting? Did you attend a Nazi meeting? Did you contribute to funds? Did you ever denounce anyone? The words Hauptschuldig, Belastet, Minder Belastet, Mitlaufer, Entlastet were categories designed to sort an entire population as if they were items in a warehouse. The Spruchkammern heard cases in school auditoriums. They listened to testimony with the patience of clerks and the exhaustion of judges. The math was never pure. A baker could be an offender, a teacher could be a follower, a policeman could be exonerated, a Jew could testify in a hall where swastikas had hung. Occupation government integrated need into law. They needed administrators and engineers. They needed continuity. Spruchkammer file, Fulda Land, case 2678, Carl W., employment record, Reich Labor Service, NSKK driver training course. 1938, Wehrmacht Motor Transport Detachment, 1940-45, never a member of the NSDAP, attended 2 SA social functions in 1937 per witness testimony, disputed. No evidence of involvement in crimes. Character witness, Pastor R. He borrowed our truck to move bricks in 1945. He helped the Schlesian family with a classification that came with a fine of 50 Reichsmarks, denominated in a currency dissolving as the new D-mark was being designed. He hung the paper in a drawer next to his soldier's paybook and a photograph of himself in a peaked cap he tore in half. The mathematics of guilt did not balance. It rarely does when guilt becomes public policy. Just surveys from 1947 asked, "Do you think National Socialism was a good idea badly carried out?" 55% in the American zone said yes. Another question asked, "Do you believe the trials at Nuremberg are just?" The answers divide along lines of experience, hunger, and propaganda sediment. Many did not want to be judged by victors. Many did not want to judge at all. Spruce Kaman demoted and then reinstated thousands. The system needed stability more than thorough justice. Bundesarchiv records show the turn. Cases slowed. Files thinned. A column sashayed from Bellestedt to Mittelhofer, with one testimonial, one notarized memory. Purcellschein were literal whitewash, letters saying he was always decent. A letter could change a category. A category could change a life. An entire generation learned the arithmetic of exoneration. The expelled arrived with farm carts and blank eyes. 12 million. Some say 14. The numbers defy domes and ceilings. They came from East Prussia, from Silesia, from the Sudetenland. The routes were long and the reception was not kind. "We have nothing," locals said. "We have nothing," expellees said. The arithmetic of scarce rooms turned hospitality into a ledger. Local housing office, Fulda, 3 February 1946, 2-room flat, Lutherstrasse 11. Assign 1 room to widow B, 1 room to Scholl's family of 4, refugees from Breslau. Attic to be subdivided for single man, W, released from war service. That was Karl. He slept under a roof that had holes like constellations. He spent nights listening to the Scholl's father cough, and the widow whisper prayers to a god that was as busy as any bureaucrat. There were fights in courtyards, there were slurs whispered and shouted, there were moments of unexpected mutuality. The Scholl's girl, 12, sang a song from Silesia with words no one in Fulda knew. The widow lent her a kettle. Karl watched. He kept accounts. He offered to drive the Scholl's father to the employment office on a Sunday. He took a carton of cheap cigarettes and traded it for a pair of boots. That arithmetic of scarcity taught him how to see margins and how to profit, but it also taught him where the line is. He put his own name on the waiting list for rooms and moved himself to the end with a little sigh, a small act of contrition that no one saw. Displaced persons lived at the edge of town in repurposed barracks. Zielsheim near Frankfurt held Jewish survivors whose tattoos shone like numbers pressed into an oily ledger. There were Poles, Ukrainians, and French who had been forced to work for German factories and who did not yet have homes to return to. Allied reports referred to these places with clinical clarity. DP Camp Zielsheim, 2519. Jewish DPs as of 1 line 45. The barbed wire had not been removed. It had been reassigned. In a letter, a British officer calls it practical. In an oral history, a German housewife calls it the strangest thing I ever saw. In his notebook from 1946, Karl wrote 9 words. We drive past, we do not look, we pass. A shipment of scrap wood to the outskirts put him in sight of a camp gate, where he saw a man in a coat too thin gesture for bread, and a guard. American or Jewish, he did not see, carried a rifle with a strap shining like new leather. Occupational psychology is not an official discipline, but it has paperwork. Allied interrogations recorded the late blooming of knowledge. Did you know about the crimes? The answers glided like trucks finding smoother gear. We heard rumors. We saw smoke. We did not look. There was denial that slid into self-protection. There was occasional acknowledgement. A woman in an interrogation. Kassel, 1946. We smelled it. My husband said it was a tannery. A DP spoke to a German policeman through a translator. You said it was war. This is war too. The arithmetic of compassion had been repressed by propaganda and fear. Slowly, little by little, it shifted as evidence became inventory. Piles of wedding rings in photographs, film reels played in destroyed cinemas turned lecture halls. The films were called Die Todesmällen, the death mills. People watched, people vomited, people stopped going. Other people went and then claimed later they had never seen them. Silence is also arithmetic. It subtracts without a trace. The road changed. Bridges were built by engineers wearing uniforms with stars on the shoulders. Temporary Bailey bridges became permanent, partly because steel is steel and budgets are budgets. The Autobahn was pre-war, but this road network became something else after. The Americans saw lines on a map. The British saw lines of control. The Germans saw paths to market. The economic transition began in crates. The Marshall Plan was two logics welded together, containment and development. A box from Bremen labeled ERP contained pipe fittings. Another one contained canned meat. The first ERP deliveries came in 1948. Photographs show men with caps unloading onto platforms with names of companies that would soon become more important than ministries: Krupp, Siemens, Opel. A caption reads, "Europe self-help." The phrase is a rhetorical trick that hides the arithmetic of power. The money stipulated reforms. The reforms regulated labor and freed prices. The currency reform of June 20th, 1948 moved from rumor to reality with small pieces of paper stamped with numbers and signatures. Karl stood in line and received 40 Deutsche Mark. He held them like a revelation. The black market died in a day. Prices rose in a day. Shop windows filled in a week. Economic historians argue about the scale and timing. Many agree that the reform made the ledger clear. Karl used his 40 marks to buy fuel and 3 tires. He bought a 4th tire with SID. He borrowed his cousin's license and passed the test legally by memorizing road signs and illegal by smiling to a clerk who understood how everything worked when it was not written down. He retrieved an Opel Blitz truck from the yard of a bombed sugar factory. Its bed was burned. Its engine needed seals. He learned to fix them. He wrote W in white paint on the door. He registered Spedition W with a municipal office that had once registered compulsory labor and now delivered trade permits. The man behind the desk wore the same hair and a different lapel pin. Erhard called it prosperity through competition. The phrase became a religion for men who had been soldiers and needed a new creed. Competition meant less control from ministries. It meant commodity flows larger than regional loyalties. For Karl, it meant contracts, rubble to dumping grounds, bricks to brickworks, sugar beets to processing plants, cement to new housing estates for expellees. The mathematics of logistics took over. Tonnage per kilometer, kilograms per litre of fuel. Time saved by knowing the gate clerk's daughter was sick, and the guard at the next door was partial to sausage. He watched a city reassemble. Darmstadt's markt began to sell vegetables that were not swollen with water. Fulda's Dom had scaffolding that seemed to touch the heavens. In office windows, typewriters clicked like insects, the precise rhythm of a new state writing itself. The Federal Republic would be founded in 1949. The Basic Law was passed. Words, not bricks, did the work now. The Allied reservations still mattered. Rail cars still carried coal in lines that seemed to stretch to the horizon. Coal miners wrote their own arithmetic of labor and hazard. They broke their bodies to light kitchens and factories. Karl delivered sacks of coal and stacks of boards and occasionally trailers of pipes to repair lines that had been bombed. He built relationships with men he would have feared to meet in a trench: dockers, mechanics, union stewards. He learned the word Mitbestimmung. He learned that a foreman's handshake is a contract, but a lawyer's stamp is safer. The Frankfurt airfield hummed with DC-3s during the airlift. From June 1948 to May 1949, the sky over Hesse became a route with mathematics as pure as any artillery table. If the load-off is 30 seconds per plane, and the glide slope is fixed, and the consumption of chocolate bars per child is 1 per week, then the days will pass, and an entire city will be kept alive by arithmetic. Rosanen bombers, they were called, raisin bombers. The road had to yield to the air. Karl watched from the edge of a hangar once while delivering food to a canteen. He saw American pilots throw candy with handkerchief parachutes. He saw Germans waving to the man who had yesterday demanded surrender. He learned that today's enemy is tomorrow's client. He learned to set aside beliefs for business, not only his own, everyone's. There were still interrogations, but the tone shifted. By 1951, the Federal Republic passed Article 3031, reintegrating civil servants who had policies are maps for power disguised as text. Former mid-level Nazis returned to desks. Teachers taught again. Karl recognized faces. He found that the man who had scowled at his queue in the ration office now approved his license to expand his fleet. The mathematics of guilt adjusted to alliance needs. The Cold War required a state, and a state required managers, and managers had pasts. The lost East became a banner. The present enemy became the East. There are nights when a map is less geography than prophecy. He hung a map of West Germany in his office and drew routes in pencil. The lines connected breweries and supermarkets and plastic factories. They skirted the border to the east, the Iron Curtain, the line where the road stopped, the absolute end where asphalt met Watchtower. By 1952, the Lastenausgleichsgesetz passed. The equalization of burdens, a law to compensate those who had lost property in the East. The title told a story. It was arithmetic as ideology. You add up loss. You subtract from the many to make whole the few. The few were many. The sums were large. The actual payouts were smaller. The politics of the trauma of expulsion became organized, Landsmannschaften with banners, commemorations, and speeches. Karl attended one not because his family was expelled, but because many of his drivers were. He listened to a speaker say, "We will not forget Breslau." He watched a woman cry with dignity and thought of the Schulz girl who had learned to pronounce Fulda in a week and never went back to Silesia because there was no back to go. He delivered boxes to a Barackenlager, being rebuilt into permanent housing. Prefab elements clicked together like an optimism kit. He won his first big contract in 1954. A firm in Frankfurt, Kuhler and Cern, making iceboxes, then refrigerators. "We need distribution," the manager said over a desk with a glass paperweight. Karl had a fleet of 9. He promised what he did not quite know how to deliver: cold units, punctuality, drivers in clean caps. He went to an auction of surplus at VEBE and bought 2 US Army trucks and a generator. He bought an American refrigeration unit second-hand. It rattled like a reformed sinner but stayed cold. He painted over surfaces until they shined. He instructed his drivers to whistle when they delivered so housewives would know to open doors. He told them, "We're selling a future. Drive like you are delivering light." Supermarkets appeared like a new kind of church, self-service stores with fluorescent tubes and aisles that taught a new way to shop. Fair prices, more choice, more packaging. The arithmetic is visible: speed plus variety times disposed income equals ritual. The word consume had always had a double edge. In 1958, it lost the edge and became a smile. Karl's lorries rattled into city districts that had been rubble. They parked beside new storefronts. They unloaded heavy boxes to managers who smelled like aftershave and ambition. He pressed a hand to a refrigerator. It hummed. He thought, this is modern. He thought, I am indispensable now, not like before when driving was a skill among killers. He thought, the road is my ally. His drivers brought stories and pieces of the country into his office. A boy in Bremen with leather shoes pointing at a lorry and saying, big. A policeman in Nuremberg who had once been in the SA asking for cigarette money and a ride home. An extortion attempt. A menu stained with gravy from a Rasthaus in Baden with antlers on the wall. On Fridays they brought paperwork. Paperwork is the meat of legitimacy. He learned to love forms. He learned to be exact. He built his empire not with speed but with the arithmetic of compliance. Signatures filled, taxes paid, drivers insured. He learned to treat the state as a kind of weather. Sometimes it rains, sometimes it shines. Always you must plan your trip accordingly. He joined the CDU via a friend who said it was good for business. He kept a photograph of Adenauer on his office wall because clients liked what that signaled. He remembered a photograph of Hitler in a different office. He charted the divergence and the continuity and kept it to himself. In 1955, West Germany joined NATO. The Bundeswehr formed. The men with grey uniforms returned, but they wore a different posture. It was in the angle of the cap. It was in the way they talked about duty. War seemed far. The memory of war made advertising seem like redemption. You deserve a refrigerator. You deserve a washing machine. You deserve this because you survived. That line was never written. It ran like an undercurrent through 1,000 glossy brochures. In schools, children learned that the war was a catastrophe that had happened to the Germans as much as it had happened by the Germans. Schoolbooks were cautious. They used a passive voice. They emphasized bombings and hunger and flight. A sixth-grade textbook in Hesse, 1956 edition, used 3 pages on the expulsion of Germans from the East and 1 paragraph on Jews. The paragraph uses we where it should use they, and uses terrible things where it should use nouns. Ministry of Culture guidelines showed the arithmetic of a nation that needed to be a nation before it could be honest. Carl's son brought home a drawing of a plane dropping candy. He put it on the refrigerator door. He tried not to think of planes that had dropped fire. There were occasions when the silence broke like ice. December 1959, vandals painted swastikas on a synagogue in Cologne. The press wrote headlines. The state reacted. There were arrests. Adenauer spoke of shame. Karl read the article and felt heat in his face. He had never met a Jew in a conversation that lasted more than a minute. He had driven past DP camps. He had watched people weep in dark cinemas and had looked away. Now the swastika was back on a wall. He went to his office and found a file with an old letter from 1946 in it. An American soldier had thanked him for services. He had kept it because it had been his Persil Shine once. He looked at it and thought, the world judges us, and we judge ourselves, and we are lenient. Televisions were placed in living rooms, in restaurants, in pubs. The Eichmann trial in 1961 was broadcast across the new country. The screen showed a glass booth in Jerusalem and a man in a suit with a face like an office wall. Witnesses spoke, and words did not cover the gulf. The specific and the absolute met. For many, it was the first time they heard as testimony what had been known as rumor. Karl's wife turned her face away. His son asked questions. Karl did not have language. The mathematics of guilt moved like a tide. It confronted the arithmetic of living. To run a company is to prefer predictability. But the past is not a business partner. It returns invoices long after delivery. The trial did not reconcile anything. It did not dissolve his line. We drove soldiers then. It made that line heavier. Business is a set of habits. Every Tuesday, he met a man from a bank who used a fountain pen with a gold nib and spoke about lines of credit as if they were fishing lines. Every April, he paid taxes. Every August, he considered new routes to the south. He learned to prefer the A3 to the A7 during school holidays. He learned where the police checked axle loads and where they did not. He learned to carry extra paperwork. He learned to never talk about the war with clients. He learned that all the men in suits had pasts like stones in riverbeds. They were smoothed by time. They still could cut your foot if you stepped on them wrong. There were fragments that altered his course. A letter from his brother in 1955. The brother had been in Soviet captivity. He returned, thin and silent. He worked as a clerk in a small town. He drank on weekends. He refused to talk about the camp. He said one sentence, "In the camp, we learned to value details." Karl did not ask for details. He could not carry them. He already carried his own. He carried a memory of an army convoy crawling through fog near Smolensk. He carried the smell of wet wool and diesel. He carried the image of a roadside where a farm cart tilted into a ditch and the woman who pulled it did not look up when the motors passed. He learned that forgetting is not emptying. Forgetting is overlaying. He overlaid trucks and refrigerators. There were policies that brought him profit and made him uneasy. In 1957, a tax law benefited asset depreciation for commercial vehicles. He used it. He bought 3 new MAN trucks. A man at a party called him a trucking king as a joke, and then used the phrase in a newspaper clip that sat on his mother's mantle. The public story is the story of a nation redeemed by work. The private story is the story of bargains made and corners shaved, of looking away, of small brutalities that are not recorded. A driver of his punched a man at a rast house for saying, "We should have finished the job." The police were not called. The driver was warned. Karl shook his hand and stood with a tightness in his jaw. He did not think of heroism. He thought, what kind of language will my son speak when he is 40? He is 42 now, with fingers permanently blackened with grease lines that never washed out. He owns a ring with a small stone that he bought for his wife when the 4th year of profits looked like salvation. He does not pray. He writes little notes. He uses pencil. He keeps these notes in a folder with a rubber band. He writes, "The road teaches me what the city denies." He writes, "The inventory of guilt is not written in red, but in grey." 17 October 1962. Rasthof-Greifenhausen. He is between deliveries. He has one lorry parked near the way station with a broken tail light. He has time to write and not show it to anyone. His drivers go inside for coffee. The German coffee is no longer chicory. It is real. The waitress has her hair in a bun with a pencil in it. On the radio is a song a boy would call too sweet. Newspapers mention Cuba. The Cold War is now a contest of missiles drawn as schematic arrows on maps. The arithmetic of annihilation is suddenly on breakfast tables. Franconia, Fulda, Frankfurt, all within the radius of strategic thinking. He draws a small diagram on the back of the manifest, a square for his yard, lines for routes, a circle in pencil around his family house. He writes, "The front line now runs through paperwork and memory." He casts back to 1945 as the hunger winter sets in. The river Fulda froze. Officials instructed citizens how to burn bricks and coal dust. The black market moved into basements. His mother sewed a coat from blankets. A British officer in an inspection report writes, "The population displays ingenuity in matters relating to heat." He calls it ingenuity to avoid calling it desperation. Karl carried fuel when he could get it. He carried messages. He carried unregistered hopes. He carried unregistered hopes. He kept a list of people who owed him favors. He kept another list of people he owed. That ledger was more important than any account book. He remembers denazification as a rhythm. It was an appointment in a room with low ceilings. It smelled of mildew and paperwork. A man with glasses and a woman with a typed page asked questions. He answered as if he was stepping through a minefield. Left foot, right foot, breathe. He said, "I was a driver." He did not say, "I was good at it." He said, "I transported men and materiel." He did not say, "I transported fear." He did not say, "When I closed the canvas flap, I could pretend that I was carrying sacks of flour." He did not say, "The sacks could speak." He left with a paper that allowed a company later to hire him and then to let him work. The system needed stability, and his competence provided it. That is the mathematics of necessity. It is as ugly as it is effective. He remembers the Scholz family. He remembers the day the father got a job as a porter. He remembers the day the girl no longer cried at night. He remembers a fight in the shared kitchen about sugar. He remembers a Sunday when they all shared a cake and someone turned the knife to divide the slices with a precision that was a kind of prayer. There is arithmetic in cutting cake, each piece weighed by eye, fairness measured by faces. He remembers thinking that his city had become a household, with quarrels and reconciliations. He remembers that the city did not want to be a household. It wanted to be a machine where parts interlock and noise is predictable. He remembers that buses still did not run on time in 1947, but his lorry did. He remembers the first time he saw Zeilsheim. He remembers standing behind his wheel and looking at a gate and looking away. It was not fear. It was avoidance. He knows this in retrospect and calls it what it was. The more he drives on the A5 now, the more he realizes that the road has lines where people stood in lines. The technical terms make him feel safe. Throughput, logistics, loads per hour. They mute moral questions. They do not extinguish them. The line from the first page of the manifest is his attempt to force those two languages, the technical and the historical, into the same sentence. He thinks about numbers. He thinks that his company consumes 6,000 liters of diesel per week. He thinks that his trucks travel 22,000 kilometers in 7 days. He thinks that in the winter of 1946 he consumed 1,000 calories when he needed more, and that consumption is now devotions made with glass bottles of milk and loaves of packaged bread and meat that is not horse. He thinks that guilt is not a number, but it is managed like a number. It is budgeted, it is distributed, it is collected by law and by rumor. He thinks that he has never visited a memorial to the murders of Jews. He thinks that he has not done so because he has been busy. He thinks that busy and guilty look alike on paper but feel different in the stomach. He remembers the first time he stood in front of a classroom as a father. Parents, evening 1956. The teacher spoke about the future. He spoke about West Germany as a moral power. He spoke about a place in the world. He did not say, "We did this." He said, "We will do this." The grammar told a story. It promised redemption by effort. He liked that grammar. He wondered what it was hiding. He wondered if the teacher had ever worn a uniform. He did not ask. He wrote a note to himself. Check on the school books. He did not. The German economy grew faster than confessions. Wirtschaftswunder was a headline and a hypnosis. The wonder is measured in percentages. GDP growth at rates that feel like a carousel pulling away from a fairground where the tents are still being taken down. The Americanization of consumption is recorded in photographs. Women in polka dot dresses in front of stores that sell toasters. Men in shirt sleeves reading papers about Suez and Sputnik. Trucks on highways. Trucks like his. He sees a convoy of refrigerators like a troop column and flinches for a second and then smiles to his driver in the rearview mirror. He is happy and alarmed that happiness is possible. He reads the paper now. He reads about a Spiegel affair. He reads about new universities. He reads about traffic fatalities and wonders if the arithmetic of asphalt is becoming as deadly as the arithmetic of the air had once been. He reads about the building of the wall in 1961. He remembers his route near the border where the road ended. He imagines the road used to continue east like a sentence that now stops with a period that is a concrete block. He imagines what the drivers there feel. He imagines their arithmetic. We drive, and then we stop, and then we turn around. He imagines an East German Karl who drives tractors and keeps a small notebook and thinks the same thoughts but W.